So I was saying, yes, the professor was aware that I was interested in China history. And he said to me that for the presentation, why not you do something that you like? Have you heard of Joseph Needham? I said, no, who is this person? I have not heard of him before. How can you not know? He's a very important scholar who studied about the, the development of science and technology in ancient China. So I didn't know about him. It was a good starting point. Because of that presentation, I went on to read more about his works and more about him, and I began to appreciate his contribution and achievement to the academic world. Today we are here to talk about Joseph Needham because of a very important question, the Needham question. What is the Needham question about? Joseph Needham was aware of the eldest Communism, was aware of the advancement of the science and technology in ancient China, which most of the Westerners at that point of time were not aware of. Many Western scholars believed that the state of science and technology in Europe was far more advanced than the rest of the world. Asia, East Asia, the contributions to science is minute, insignificant. They are the founders of modern science in the European eyes. Joseph Needham managed to know somebody who convinced him otherwise, who told him that there are lots of exciting progress and development of science in ancient China, but the Westerners do not know. Somebody ought to spread this information to the rest of the world so that they are aware of the overall phenomenon and development of science throughout the whole world, not a European-centric point of view about science. Needham was convinced. He went to China, went to do his research, and he found out that this is true. In his works, the Science and Civilization in China highlights all the findings that he discovered. He makes a comparison between a particular invention that was quite well known in Europe, but had its origin in China. So for examples, paper. Paper was originated in China, and it had a very big impact in the Western world. Printing, gunpowder, compass. So all these inventions that helped Europe to develop to a higher stage, higher level, all originates from China. But nobody was aware of that at that point of time until Needham submitted his findings and shared with the rest of the world. So the Western world was amazed and enlightened by his discovery and his research. So why are we talking about Joseph Needham today? Because we want to find out what answers he has to the question. The Needham question is a puzzle that puzzled people for many, many years to come. Until today, to this point of time, nobody has the absolute complete answer to the question. And what is the question about? Needham realized that the state of science in China was far more advanced than the rest of the world, comparing to relatively to Europe. And the trend reversed from the 14th and 15th century onwards. So during this stage of time, science in China seems to go on decline, and the West catch up and superseded and exceeded the achievements of China. So why is it that the 14th and 15th century is the turning point for China? So that is the Needham question. And the other part of Needham question is that China, being so advanced than the rest of the world in the beginning, did not develop modern science, but modern science was born in Europe. Why is that so? We are going to look at the definitions of science and modern science. There are some slight differences between these two. So to understand and fully know the context of Needham's question, we have to get clarification and understand the definition of these two terms. Science in ancient China, science in ancient society, and modern science. What's the difference between these two? We will explore this in a while. For the first part of my talk, The structure of my talk always goes like this. There will be a first half, and about 1 hour 45 minutes, there will be the interval break. You go for the refreshments, toilet break. When you come back, we go for a discussion question, about 15 minutes. After the discussion question, we resume with part 2 of the talk. So don't leave after the refreshment. That's not the end of the talk. First half of the talk, we're going to talk more about Joseph Needham's background, his life. And we shall explore whether was it his parents or was it his upbringing that influenced his interest towards the science of ancient China. Joseph Needham was a famous scientist in Britain, England. He was a biochemist. And when I say that to you, you'll be wondering how on earth does a biochemist later went on to become interested in China history. It's a very interesting story that is going to unfold in a while. His knowledge, his influence, or his interest towards seeking knowledge came from his upbringing, his father especially. His father was a physician, a doctor, quite a well-known surgeon, I think. So his father promoted learning at home. At home, his father set up a cozy library at the corner. Needham had access to books at a very young age. It was said that at the age of 10, between 10 to 12 years old, he really started to read a book called Introduction to Philosophy. At the age of 10 to 12, probably I was reading a book with pictures. So that's the difference. His mother was an Irish woman. Some moments of unhappiness in the family. His mother is very temperamental. So it was said that when their parents argue, his mother would throw plates at his father. So that's the kind of family that he grew up with. Needham wasn't very proud of his mother, and when there are occasions to go on vacations with the family, he tried to avoid going out with his mother. The relationship between the father and mother was not so good, so during the summer breaks, vacation, the two of them usually go on their separate vacations. Needham has to choose between the father and the mother. Needham seems to be closer to the father. And when Needham reached his teenage years, he had a chance to work as an assistant under his father in the operating theatre. He has a good understanding of human anatomy and biology. Because of this exposure, he works more like an assistant passing equipment and utensils to the operating staff. He wasn't involved in the operation, of course, obviously. Wasn't qualified, but he was involved in the assisting of the procedures. Simple task, but that also helped him to be exposed to science. When he grew up, he made a decision that he wants to sign up for Cambridge University doctor course. But at that time, they had the luxury to choose another course if they felt that this is not for him. During his first year, he was doing some courses on biochemistry as a rep module, perhaps, like something outside of your main core subjects. He was exposed to biochemistry. The tutor was extremely inspiring to him. He decided to switch course, and he did biochemistry instead. And this is... okay, let me go to the next slide first. I want to share about his degree. Yes, so he did a degree in chemistry in Cambridge, PhD in biochemistry. His expertise is in embryology and morphogenesis. Embryology is a study of the development of eggs to life. It's very technical stuff. And it was from his course that he met his wife, Dorothy. Dorothy is an expert in biochemistry of muscles. So both of them are experts in the field of chemistry and biochemistry, and they publish quite a number of literature and journal articles. Needham was said that at the age of 30 plus, he really edited his first piece of work and published his first piece of publication, which was quite influential. He made a name for himself. He's a very accomplished biochemistry scholar, scientist. That is for his career, but what about his personality? He's a very tall guy, quite an attractive person, handsome, expert in language as well. Picked up 8 languages, including Chinese language. For Chinese language, he's more proficient in writing and reading rather than speaking. It's said that he had interest in Chinese calligraphy. There was a Chinese calligraphy session just now before this talk. Anyway, coming back, he's quite good in Chinese calligraphy. He learned and picked up Chinese calligraphy. When he was doing his work on the science and the science of China, he was exposed to the primary source, ancient texts that is in Chinese. He didn't require a translator. I think that is very important, in the sense that if you rely on a translator, meaning is lost in the middle. A translator might translate something differently, and when you read it, you interpret it differently, but he's able to read the primary source himself firsthand. So that knowledge of being able to read in Chinese helped him a lot in compiling this book. Communist sympathizer. At that point of time in this period, China was under the heavily influenced by the ideology of communism, and it was an experimental stage at that point of time. Nobody knows capitalism or communism is the right way to go. You know, Russia was strong. They were using the ideology of communism to run their country. China, likewise. For Needham, he believes that communism is the right way to go for China. There was a record that says when the TV broadcasted the Mao's speech that China would be a communist republic, Needham was so happy that he had tears of joy. So that's his perspective towards communism, and that inclination towards communism is going to give him some trouble later on, which we will uncover soon. This background of him being an expert in chemistry and biochemistry is going to set the background to how he's going to come to get into contact with exposure, understanding about the state of ancient China, especially in development of science and technology. It's quite unexpected, quite an interesting twist of life. Without this moment in his life, there's no works on science and civilization of China. We wouldn't be able to know that China have achieved so much in its past. And this moment comes because of a woman, not his wife, but his mistress. This is Needham's mistress, Lu Guizhen, that's her name. So Lu Guizhen, when she was in China, Nanjing, she had been a very accomplished biochemist as well in China. She read about Needham's books, she read about his wife's work, and he was impressed by that work. So she told herself, I must go to England to find them personally and exchange ideas. So she flew to England and she met the professors. It was arranged that Dorothy is Needham's wife, to be the supervisor for her. So the supervisor, Dorothy, brought her to meet her husband. And then it was love at first sight. Chemistry. So there was chemistry between them. So suitable, right? They are doing chemistry. They are experts in the field of chemistry. So Lu Guizhen and Needham had their affair openly. Dorothy was aware of it, but Dorothy did not object, because Dorothy was she admired Lu's talent in the field. So she accepted the affair and let it carry on. In their conversations, in the dialogues, Lu has revealed to Needham that, you know about the state of science in China, right? We believe, me and my dad, I'm referring to Lu, okay? Lu says to Needham that me and my dad believe that the state of science in ancient China is far superior than what you all think. I think it is good that you should take an opportunity to try to learn more about this. So Needham started to have his curiosity about that. It was through Lu Guizhen that Needham picked up the Chinese language. So this is the affair. They look very happy together, the three of them, enjoying their lunch, smiling at each other. Yeah, looks like a happy family. Then the opportunity come for Needham. His curiosity about China already started to be regained. He's inspired by Lu. Now this opportunity comes when the Cambridge University was tasked to assess the situation of the universities in China. This was the time where World War II was taking place. Japan was invading China. The state of education in China was in ruins, very bad. The Western world, Europe, UK especially, was thinking of how they could come in and help and support to rebuild the universities and to promote education. There was a team of people being sent to assess the situation. Needham warned him, so I want to go to China and assess the situation. And so he's among the mission to go over to China to check how the schools are doing. Are the schools suffering from heavy damage? Is there need to recover any infrastructure or rebuild anything? That was his primary goal. He used this opportunity to do his side interests, like me. I'm using my opportunity as a librarian to do my side interest in Chinese history. Okay, so he took this opportunity to go to China in the name of assessing the condition there, to also do his research at the same time. He was very impressed by the findings he found through trivial encounters with the people. On his landing, he went to a shop. He saw the Chinese people using a calculator, not your digital calculator, but do you know what it is? Yes. Yeah. So the Chinese man was using that to do maths, and he was amazed. This is some kind of mathematics formula. He discovered that there's a principle behind it. And he also realized that the Chinese were good in botany. They were practicing techniques of grafting without them knowing it. Grafting is a technique where you transfer certain parts of a plant onto another plant to allow it to grow. That's a simple way to explain it. Okay, it's a well-known technique in established forms of botany. Chinese know what they are doing, as in they are doing it, but they are not aware of the principle behind it, the science behind it, but they are able to apply it. The state of science in China appears to be more inclined towards applied science rather than theoretical science. We're going to come into that later, the difference between the two. Needham was very excited by his findings. Aside from these trivial encounters, he went on to look for books. He would look for ancient texts. He would keep a copy of the book and bring it back home to study more. He began to accumulate many different sources. So what would he do with these sources? In his compilation of his work, he would lay out all the sources he had, pass it to his assistant. They will read through the books together, and they find a certain idea or a certain technology. For example, he reads an encyclopedia, ancient China history encyclopedia. He reads, he comes across a page. Hey, oh, this looks like a description of gunpowder. Let me write down. Gunpowder noted in China history, Chinese ancient texts. and they begin to extend more and more of such catalog. It's a catalog of observations of possible technology from all these sources. After this catalog is created, they went on to look at the dates. Oh, this particular technology is recorded in a text about 14th century, for example, just an example. Of this 14th century predates the first use of the same technology in Europe by 400 years. So that means that China came before the West to have this particular piece of device. This is a hint that the origin of that technology comes from China. So that's how he comes about to do his work. He does a comparison of when was the first indication and usage of this piece of device. And from there he concludes, oh, this is the origin. China has invented this. And he will also trace back to other records which proved that the technology has been transported from China to Europe and adapted over there. Other than the books, he traveled to various parts of China to talk to the locals. There are different experts in all parts of China who have an extensive knowledge of a certain technology, a certain device. He does a personal talk interview with them to get and retrieve the information. So all this is his first early steps and these foundations to getting the information relevant to his work. And this is not the right thing yet so far. It's just accumulation of information. All this done because of his access, his direct access to China. If he was to be in England all this time, he would not have been able to compile so much first-hand, first-source information. After the assessment of after the mission was completed, the assessment of the condition of education in China, he went back to his university and began to write his works in his spare time. There are a lot of obstacles along the way. So one major obstacle would be that he's a biochemist, so how is he going to find time to write this work that is not his main job scope? Very hardworking person. He's a very hardworking person. He would stay very late beyond his normal working hours to do his work, and he would use his time on the train. Nowadays, when we are on the train, we would use our smartphone and our tablet. On the other hand, for long distance train rides, he would buy first class ticket. Why he buys first class? Not because he wants to enjoy the luxury, but because of the space. The space of the cabin was big, so he's able to spread all his materials. Remember the catalog that I mentioned, a record of the device or the technology. So with the space from the first class cabin, he spread out his materials, he compiled them, and he classified them accordingly. And that is how he finds spare time to organize his information. This is an uphill task, a very monotonous task to take on, especially when there's so many aspects to science. You have biology, you have physics, you have chemistry, so many things. So how is he going to do it? He came up with a very good idea. After a brief organization of the catalog, he realized that the science of China can be grouped into the following categories. He planned his volumes first. He hasn't started writing, he planned his volumes first, that he will go by this. Volume 1 will be on geography, history, Volume 2 will be on philosophy and how it influenced science, blah 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 blah. Next, he find people who are good in these areas. These 7 volumes are not all done solely by Joseph Needham. He find assistants, people who are good in those areas as well. Like, for example, I'm not sure which volume it comes under. I think it is volume 4. There's a part about agriculture. He gets another colleague. Her name will come up soon. He gets another colleague to compile and write the information on that aspect. Out of these 7 volumes, the first few volumes, volume 1 and 2 can be said to be written entirely by Needham, but the rest no. The rest he had some contributions and he left the rest to his assistant to assist. Till today, I just went to find out. I found that volume 5, I remember volume 5 and volume 6, certain parts of it is still not published at this point of time. It's still in the process of completion. From this, you can see that it's a very labor-intensive task. Need a lot of people, a lot of time to complete. For Needham, he's able to complete the first 2 volumes. It is already quite an achievement. Conclusions come under volume 7. I read that book, that particular volume. That one was also entirely compiled by Needham. For volume 7, volume 7 will be the focus for today's talk. Volume 7 deals with the question, Needham's question of why China science went on a decline starting from the 14th, 15th century. All along this is the planning and parts of the writing. Before he could publish the work, something bad happened. Needham was a scientist, yes, so he's an expert in chemistry field, like I said. There was a scandal, there was an issue that the US was accused of using biological weapons during the Korean War. There's an investigative panel wrote in to investigate if this is true. Needham was on very good terms with those people in China and Korea. They have the same ideology and belief in communism. His blind trust in the Korean scientists resulted him not to do his homework. The Korean scientists told him, oh yes, we found evidence that there are traces of biochemical being used in the war, so he believed it wholeheartedly. He did not do his homework. And in his report, he concluded, yes, the US had used such technology, and that is, of course, a very big thing. The US sent another panel to re-investigate again, and they found that the outcome was a series of frauds and misinformation. Needham loses his credibility because of that. Nobody is going to trust him. For that, he was very afraid. What if I'm going to launch my works on science and civilization in China? Because of my ruined credibility, nobody is going to believe what I say. He lay low for that time. Between 2 to 3 years, about 2 to 3 years period of time, he did not publish his work and waited for the right time. Finally, the works came. He published his first volume in 1954. That's a very long time ago, right? 2015, wow. How many years is that? 60 years. Since his first volume. Now, it's not even completed yet for the whole 7 volumes. Think how long it is to take. He published his first volume in 1954. This is the cover page of how it looks like. I read the works myself. I find that the early volumes, meaning volume 1 to volume 6, is readable to common people. The phrasing, the vocabulary, the terms used is still okay, but volume 7, I had a hard time reading it and trying to digest it. Why? Because there is a lot of prior knowledge needed for that particular volume. You have to know something about science. There are descriptions about physics. I'm not very good in physics. I'm not very good in the formulas and the mathematics aspect of it, but a lot of that was covered in volume 7. And there was a lot of terms and terminologies about communism in volume 7. Now we don't use such framework to study history, but at that time, communism theory of history was very popular. I had a colleague from China. He shared with me that for China history, during their China history lessons, they learned that the progress of China history is in the form of various economic stages. Communism theory forced the development of history into such a pattern. So ancient civilization will start with a slavery society. Why slavery? Because the economics is based mainly on slavery labor force, like your Rome, ancient Rome. Colosseum, such a magnificent architect, and your aqueducts, all these are built with the force of slaves. Early civilization start with a slave-based economy. After that, it goes into feudal-based economy. And after feudalism, you have, what's next? Some kind of capitalism. And after capitalism, you will have socialism, and you have communism. So that's how they will always interpret history. Or if you're a fervent believer of communism. So for Chinese schools, I heard that they still study theory like this on how to understand the development of China history. That is why it is extremely crucial that Joseph Needham deals with all these abstract terms and terminology. In volume 7, I read, he argues strongly against using such model. He presented evidence that, look, if you want to say Chinese society was feudalism, these are the evidence that does not support that model. Oh, it was a pain for me to read because I need to check my dictionary, I need to understand the economic theory of communism. Later we will come across a term. It's pronounced as bourgeoisie, I think bourgeoisie. Bourgeoisie, yes, I don't know what that is. I had a hard time trying to understand what that term is. Okay, I will try to explain to you from how I understand, but if I'm lacking, please help and assist. Yeah, I've covered this. So very sensitive at that point of time, the conflict and challenge between these two ideologies, democracy, Western ideals of democracy and capitalism against a Russian form of communist, pro-communism society and economics. Knowing that the West, especially US and UK, most of them would be pro-democracy and pro-capitalism. If Needham being on the side of communist ideologies publish a book, will it be well received? No, would it be boycotted? Would people accuse and criticize that his work is biased? That is his main challenge. He was worried, but he felt that no, I have to continue, I have to publish this. It's a very important piece of information. Now the other sensitive part is that China was a communist state. If you're going to launch a book that praised China, how is the US going to see this book? So a lot of very sensitive, politically sensitive issues when it comes to the publication of this book. Needham understands the risk. He chose to went on. He chose to go on to publish his book. And how do you think it was received? Poor? Good? Don't know? Okay, let's see how it goes. How did the Western world react? Surprisingly, they welcomed this piece of work. It's good news for the academic world. It turns out that the scholarly field is not so concerned about politics. It's a good piece of sharing, which is well researched, has its good basis, it is accepted. His books was very popular, very influential. And these are some of the comments at that point of time. I'll just have a drink. a review from Manchester Guardian, Prodigalus, perhaps the greatest single act of historical synthesis and intercultural communication ever attempted by one man. It's a very magnificent piece of work which bridged the communication barrier and the gap between the West and the East. So the West has for a very long time seemed to dominate the field of science, and they acknowledge their superiority without consideration to the foundation, how they have come about to build the roots of science in Europe, in the West. It is because of it that they found out of they managed to find the missing piece. Oh, so this is how it started off, because of the development of science in the East, that such knowledge and information is passed to the West, that the West act on it, improve it, and modern science is born. One example of invention that is from the East is algebra. We do our mathematics in school, we learn algebra. X minus y equals 7, you know, that kind of stuff. Algebra, where does it originate? Not the West. It's from the Muslim world. It's from the Middle East, the Muslim world. So a lot of this basic information that is required for the development of modern science actually come from the East. So that's how it comes about. So the big picture behind the science and development is not to be said that it is just a achievement of one civilization or one empire, but it is a merge, an integration and synthesis from all different parts of the world. When it comes to gunpowder, printing, paper, my understanding is that just today, this morning, I was listening to my audiobook, and the audiobook is about Genghis Khan and the making of the modern world. In this book, it was said that the Mongols actually have a very important contribution to the modern science in Europe. Why? Because they conquered China, they controlled Middle East, they also controlled part of Europe, and they spread the ideas of such technology. Gunpowder. Gunpowder was not found in Europe at all. The Chinese invented gunpowder. They invented basic forms of explosion and artillery. Cannons, yes, they have very basic forms of cannon. The Mongols realized that, oh, this is a very good piece of technology. A lot of civilization around the world built very heavily fortified castles. How does the Mongol go about attacking? You know, they sit on the horsebacks and they have their weapons. If you're going to take down the castle, it will take so much time. Right? They realized that, oh, these cannons are very useful, so they brought the cannons with them to Europe and used it to take down the castles there. So your knights in shining armor has no use against such artillery. So the rest, Europe, exposed. They are exposed to the existence of gunpowder. They adapted that technology and they went on to improve it. So the story of science and technology is not just one civilization. It is a contribution from all parts of the world. Another review on the works Science and Civilization in China by George Steiner is, okay, this is what he says. He's literally recreating, recomposing an ancient China, a China forgotten in some degree by the Chinese scholars themselves, and all but ignored by the West. The alchemists and metal workers, the surveyors and court astronomers, the mystics and military engineers of a lost world come to life through an intensity of recapture, of empathetic insight, which is the attribute of a great historian, but even more of a great artist. Needham has elevated his status from just a scientist to a historian. his aspect of history is about the history of science. One point that is mentioned here that is quite interesting is this line here. A China forgotten in some degree by the Chinese scholars themselves. One illustrating example is the invention of a clock, of a time-telling mechanism. During the Ming Dynasty, there was a lot of interaction between China. Ming would be the 15th century, around there. A lot of interaction between Ming China and the West. A lot of Jesuits came to China. Jesuits came to China wanting to spread Christianity. I think there's this Jesuit by the name of Ricci. So he showed the Ming government a watch or a clock, something like that, and the whole imperial court was amazed by this wonderful piece of technology. But sadly speaking, they didn't know that they were the ones who came up with the clock first. During the Song Dynasty, there was already some kind of a clock that is operated using the water mechanism. So the clock, from my understanding, is built around the water source. So when the water flows, it rotates certain mechanism, and that enables the device to record time. Why is that so? Because such information is recorded, but no one went on to read about these sources. What were the scholars in China concerned with? Not science and technology, but Confucianism. They will be reading a text called Analects, which is a few thousand years ago, and they know that information, but they don't know of a mechanical clock in China during the Song Dynasty. That's the sad thing about the state of science in China. Technology was created, but over time it is forgotten. Nobody went on to retain or improve it. It was just forgotten. The impact and influence of Joseph Needham's work is that it shocked the whole Western world. The Western world now realized that a lot of the technology that brought Europe and the West to its current state originates from China. So the main four inventions that were stated by a philosopher by the name of Francis Bacon during the Middle Ages, I think. He said that the four great inventions that made Europe so powerful is compass, gunpowder, paper and printing. These four. And where do you know where all these four comes from? It's from China. It started from China. After compiling all this information, knowing that wow, there's so many technology that originates from China, Needham went on to ask a personal question. And this summarized the question that he wished to answer with urgent needs. Sadly, he was not able to answer this question during his lifetime. He has passed this legacy to the future generations. This question is for us, the future generation, to solve. So why is it that modern science originated in Europe alone, despite that it was the fact that it was China who was leading in science and technology earlier? And how was it that it was China who achieved early technology advancement compared to the rest of the world? Why was it that it was China, not Europe, not other parts of the world? So the Needham question comprised of these two parts, A and B. The difficulty of answering this question is that you are studying about the past. To have any conclusive findings, you need evidence. Now, how are you going to present strong evidence about this? When I read the conclusions chapter of Joseph Needham, a lot of his answers to the question is merely a speculative one. He says, oh, I think this could be the reason, I think that could be the reason, and he provides certain ideological reasons. Because these reasons are not very scientific in a way that it could be tested. It sounds logical, but it is problematic because you cannot be sure. There's no concrete evidence to prove that these are the reasons that leads to such a development. Now we shall understand more about the context that we are talking about. What do you mean by science of ancient China? What do you mean by modern science? Aren't these things all science? Generally speaking, yes, they are all science. But if you want to look closely, there's a difference between science of the ancient world and modern science. When we talk about the science of the ancient world, it's more about applied science. So the Chinese know that when you plant plants on the ground, if you lay them in one straight row and leave a gap and lay another row of crops, they grow better. But they don't know the reason why. All they know is that, oh, it works better. Ancient science is discovered mostly by accidental discovery. Meaning to say that I'm an ancient farmer, I didn't purposely sit down one day and was thinking to myself, oh, how do I improve cultivation? And I think, and oh yes, maybe this can work, and I tried. No, it was by chance. So maybe one day the farmer is working on his field, some animal passed by and lay a pile of shit on the ground, and realize, hey, this helped the plants to grow better. Oh, let's just try it. And fertilizer is born. It's mostly accidental compared to modern science. Modern science, not to say there's not, everything is intentional finding. There are also accidental finding. I can quote you an example, the finding of antibiotics. So there was a scientist who left a piece of bread in his wardrobe, in his cabinet, and took it out, and he realized, hey, the bread, there's yeast on the bread, and somehow the microorganisms around the yeast doesn't grow. It's interesting. Then he went to find that there's a chemical in the yeast produced called antibiotics that kill bacteria. So he used that to produce antibiotics. When you have sore throat nowadays, when you're sick, you eat antibiotics. So that's how antibiotics was discovered. That's an accidental discovery. Most of the time in the modern science field, science, the discovery is deliberate. I mean, somebody has a question. I read a very interesting story about the discovery of the proof that a planet is rotating. So this man wanted to prove. His whole day's work is about proving it. Nothing else. Okay? So his job, his goal in life is to prove that the earth rotates. So he would sit down and think, how do I prove that the earth is the one that rotates? So he had a very interesting, there is of course some chance occurrence along the way. He was trying to discover some kind of material that's able to detect such disturbance. I think he went to a workshop and he found a certain material. He saw an artisan creating something, and then he looked at this material and said, hey, this is a good piece of material that I can use. So he used this material, he made it into a very long piece, long stripe. And I think, I can't remember the exact details, but he knocked on the thing or something. Alright, so when the earth really rotates, the allocation and the placement of this material would somehow turn, and this would prove that the planet is rotating. So from that he proves, oh yes, I managed to prove that the planet rotates. So this is modern science, a deliberate attempt, sit down whole day just to prove something. Okay, but ancient science is more of a accidental discovery. That's the difference between the two. And modern science, a lot of modern science discovery is a lot to do with mathematics. Physics, finding the force of gravity is based on the mathematical formula. Another characteristics of modern science is heavy involvement of mathematics in proving a certain phenomenon. That branch of science is known as physics. And that is the birth of, that is a sign of modern science. Ancient science, you don't see mathematical formulas being used to prove something. This is the divide between these two branches of science. Modern science is also curious about the theoretical part of it. Why is it like that? How does it go? Whereas the ancient people are more interested in how to use it to do something. One example will be somebody in the ancient world knows that this material produces ink, and I'll just extract this for ink, for blue ink. For a person in modern science field, he would wonder why is it that this material, this raw material produces an ink that is blue, and then he would go into chemistry and he would separate the components and he realized, oh, this is the chemical component in the material that results in the ink to be blue. So that is the perspective of modern science, going deep, going into the theory, understanding how it works. Another thing I want to highlight is the use of experiments. In the use of experiments, you have you have a component that you want to test, but you are not sure that this component is really the one that affects the result of the test, so you set a control. I'm not sure whether you still remember your science experiments in your primary school and secondary school days where you have a variable and a control. How does it work? For example, I want to test that fertilizer A is the one that makes the plant grow better. I must take two kinds of plant that's exactly the same, right? I cannot take cabbage and carrot. I use the fertilizer on the cabbage and I test, oh, that this is growing better. No, you have to have all parameters the same first. Only one condition you change, the addition of fertilizer. So you make sure these two plants are the same species of plants, have the same sunlight, have the same water, have the same soil, except the other one is given the fertilizer. This control set is not given the fertilizer. Then you see the result. And you also have to be very precise. What am I measuring? Am I measuring how big the leaf is? Or am I measuring how tall the plant is to state that it is growing better? So very precise. This is modern science. After you set the parameters, okay, to prove that I want to show this plant is growing, I'm going to measure the length of the plant. If it grows longer, then this is growing better. Then you can go about to do your experiment. Do you think people in ancient China will be doing that? No, it's going to spend too much time. No, that's not their style. Once they know it works, they will just do it. Okay, they're not going to test whether, oh, is this really the true factor behind the difference. I hope you are clear between the definition. You are clear about the definition between ancient science and modern science. So with that pretext, you'll be better positioned to understand what's about to come in the next half of the talk. In the next half of the talk, we are going to talk a lot about ancient science, a lot about modern science. So with this pretext, it will be easier to understand. Critics of Joseph Needham's work, is everybody happy with it? No. Obviously, there will always be somebody who is not happy with you, no matter how good you are. A few critics, the first critic here says that Needham, everything in your book seems to say everything is made by Chinese people. Why you like Chinese people so much? That is what he means in this paragraph. Okay, biasness towards Chinese, everything seems to be made by the Chinese. Why you like the Chinese people so much? Are you sure? One critic. The other critic are more, it's not here, never mind. I'll tell you. The other critic is more philosophical. I also don't understand what he's trying to say. Okay, I tell you first, you try to understand what he means, okay? His name is, I think I will come across that point later on in the later slides, but I'll just share with you first. I think it's called Nathan Steven, if I'm not wrong. Okay, so he says, Needham, when he talk about Needham question, his question is phrased in this way. Why is it that modern science is not born in China? This is a stupid question. This question is like saying, why Qing Li's name is not appearing on Straits Times page 23? Because there's so many factors, right, that my name is not in page 23. It could be in page 24. Something like that, you know. It's a negative question. Instead of asking a negative question, you should ask a positive question. The positive question, the right version should be, why is modern science born in Europe? That's what Steven says. But I thought it doesn't really make sense. Does it make sense to you? But because I felt that there were a lot of questions that we asked when we study something that is a negative question, like we will say why did the Han Empire fall? Why did the Han Empire go into decline? Isn't that a negative question? Isn't that a question that we can study about? So it's a little abstract to understand why this person is arguing from that perspective, but it's for you to read up more and understand the context behind it. Maybe one day you'll be able to explain to me and the rest of the people in the room why this scholar brought up this point. At this point of time, I don't really agree with his argument against Joseph Needham. This is the sad part. So his wife passed away first in 1987. So Joseph Needham and his mistress got married 2 years after that. But it was a very short union. It was just 2 years. So Lu also passed on after that. At this point of time, Joseph Needham was very accomplished in this field, but he was very lonely. All his contemporaries, people with the same ideas as him, the same interests, all passed on one by one, and he's left by himself. He passed away eventually in 1995. If I'm not wrong, yes, 1995, a very old age, 94 years old. People remember him. Till today, we are going to talk about him for his achievements and how he rocked the academic world into understanding the state of ancient China science. People remember him, and this was a very well written piece of calligraphy in memory of him, written in Chinese, 人去留影, which means a man departs, there remains his shadow. And this piece of calligraphy is placed in his old college room. People will miss Joseph Needham. But despite that, we are very grateful to him to open this window and this platform for us to explore and find out more about that question, about the question of why science in ancient China went on the decline, and why was it that it was Europe who went on to develop modern science. This question continues to bother us and puzzle us for many years to come. I don't think we will come with an immediate answer so soon, but the rest of the academic field and world is going very rigorously to find out the answer to this question. There are many discussions and answers to this, but none of them really truly can be said as the one and solely answer to this very big question. You see, it's a very big question. How are you going to answer that in 7 volumes of books? Many things to explore. It might not be even science itself. You have to go into history, you have to go into geography, you have to go into culture, you have to go into customs. Perhaps all these reasons are the reasons behind the rise of science in West. Many factors that comes into play.